Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for the huge amount of support this channel has seen since the first part of this came out. There's been many great messages, discussions, and just overall overwhelmingly positive reactions, which is so great. So thank you for that, but that brings us to today. With having seen how excited the community is for the next expansion, and the possible lore connections that we have, I thought it would be interesting to theorize a little bit more. I wasn't really planning on doing a part 2, but after thinking it over, there's still a couple of things in the Guild Wars universe that we could perhaps see return for Secrets of the Obscure. I think we have already figured out most of the connections from the trailer and the media released so far, so some might consider this somewhat scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but it's always fun to theorize and keeping some of the older lore threads on our minds in case something involving it returns. In the first video, I leaned a lot on things from Guild Wars 1, which I love that we can draw a lot of connections between the two games for this expansion. But this time around, I took a look at certain NPCs and lore threads from Guild Wars 2. That doesn't mean you will exclusively see Guild Wars 2 stuff though, as there's still a couple of things from the first game. Alright, enough beating around the bush, let's just jump right into it. Now, I have not seen anyone talk about this particular NPC when it comes to Secrets of the Obscure. E is a very mysterious character that made themselves first known in Season 1. Not much is known about them, but they do seem to have Kryta's best interest at heart. At one point, Marjorie encountered them and she says the person had a deep voice and no necromantic powers, albeit she never saw them because they vanished. She also pointed out that we do not know E's gender, or if E's just one person or multiple people. Most everything we know about E is the letters we can find throughout the story that they sent to various people, including us, but most of the time they are said to have a large network of spies and informants and fight to protect both Kryta and the world from various threats. They also have a ruthless side to them, which they show to anyone that attempts to mislead, lie, or simply cross them. So could Mr. E, as they are known, a play on the word mystery by the way, perhaps be part of the Astral Ward? In the last video, I brought up how I think within the Astral Ward, Baltec could be designated to the Isle of Istan, since that is where we see him. The Astral Ward is said to protect the world from outside danger, so it wouldn't be crazy to think that with a lot of areas to oversee, that they designate certain people to certain areas. Could E perhaps be the person in charge of overseeing Kryta? Is that maybe why they emphasize that they not only fight to protect Kryta, but the world? As in, they protect the world by being part of a larger order or organization, but they themselves only work in the region of Kryta? Having been a mystery for the better part of a decade now, I would not be opposed to finally finding out who the person behind the curtain is. Alright, this one is probably not likely to play any role here, but it's still something I want to point out. So in Season 2, Episode 6, during the Tracking the Aspects Master story, you follow the Aspect Masters into a cave. This is the instance where the Master of Sun gets killed. Now, there's something really strange afoot during this instance. In the cave, high above the battle, there's an NPC that sits there and watches the battle. He appears to be a male human, and that is all the info we ever get about him. He just sits up on the ledge and does nothing. He also never appears in any other story instance. This could be an oversight by ArenaNet, where they meant for this NPC to become part of the story, but never did, or maybe this is supposed to represent the Master of Peace as we're still chasing him at this point, albeit it's a completely different model than what he looks like every other time. It's weird and strange, and sadly we have nothing else to go on, but perhaps this guy might see a return somehow as part of the larger picture? Like I said earlier, this is somewhat scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but in the personal story for Asuran characters, there's a chance for you to come to Garenhof as part of the Orders of Tyria's story in order to free Professor Gore as he was taken hostage by the Arcane Eye. You end up finding a secret base with a window out to the town that cannot be seen from outside. You get yourself arrested and after freeing yourself, kill everyone in the base and leave. There's no story behind this base at all. Why would a secret base of a secret Asuran police be way out here in Garenhof, which is a human settlement? Could they perhaps be keeping an eye out for the tower because of the magical power and knowledge said to be stored within? Or are they perhaps involved somehow? Speaking of Asura, I think the Asuran Council is perhaps the most mysterious of the governing bodies of the major races, as it is the one we deal with the least. It was pointed out by a commenter on the last video that one of the concept arts for the expansion is called Asura Island, which could hint towards the Asura being a little more involved here. Or maybe this is just part of one of the distorted areas. We will have to wait and see. In the last video, I briefly brought up the Scepter of Orr. This magical artifact is one of a set of two, the other being the Staff of the Mist, which we destroyed in Guild Wars 1. Vizier Kilbron, who I also mentioned, used the scepter to not only control the undead, but also the titans. He was also able to create portals that led to various places in Teria, but it's unknown if this power was granted to him by the scepter or not. The full extent of the powers of the scepter are unknown, but its sister piece, the Staff of the Mist, was said to be able to bend the fabric of the universe to the will of its user. That sounds incredibly powerful, and the scepter will probably have powers to match that, which makes it a very important object. Now, after the events of Guild Wars Eye of the North, Livia came into possession of the scepter and used its power to extend her life. We meet her again in Season 3 of The Living World, where we help her destroy Lazarus once and for all. Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, I think Livia could perhaps play a role, or maybe know some information about the mysterious Astral Ward. After all, she has lived in this world for a long time, and was in possession of a very old and powerful artifact. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that perhaps she caught the eye of the Astral Ward, especially after having finished her long quest to destroy Lazarus. More importantly though, we do not know if she's still in possession of the scepter or not, although she isn't seen with it at all throughout the story. I know it's pretty much a random powerful artifact, and we have dozens of those in the Guild Wars universe, but this one is interesting as it seems to have a connection to demonic forces, since it was used to control the Titans, who are demonic creatures, and come from the realm of torment in the mists. So do you guys think that the scepter could be important to the story? Maybe it could be used on the Cryptus in some way. Everyone knows the Eye of the North nowadays. Since Icewood Saga, it's used as a central hub for various activities in the game. But what do we truly know about the Eye of the North? Well, for one, it's a huge ancient tower in the far Shiver Peaks. That's already interesting for the current story, as we seem to have a lot of big, towery, magical structures in the Guild Wars universe, and one of them, that being the Wizard's Tower in Kessex Hills, is playing a major role in this expansion. But that can't be all, right? Well, Aurene makes this place her lair during the story because of the magical scrying pool. She says that its waters connect many threads in the mists, threads throughout time. We also use the scrying pool to see certain events that happen not just in Guild Wars 2, but the first game as well. In Guild Wars 1, it's even pointed out that none of the current major races could have built the Eye of the North, and its architecture matches that of no known species. Once again, let's talk about the first video. There, I spoke of Baltec, who, yes, was supposed to be a little hint towards Guild Wars Utopia when that was still on track, but nonetheless, he does mention how water can be used for scrying. Obviously, as this was a hint towards what was to come, it seems ArenaNet salvaged the idea from the cancelled Utopia expansion and used it in the Eye of the North expansion. However, I think it's still important to point out, as we have seen a lot of connections between Utopia and Secrets of the Obscure so far. So would it be crazy to think that perhaps the Astral Ward built the Eye of the North at some point in history? As an organization that watches over Teria, having a scrying pool would be incredibly helpful, yes? Alright, let's venture a little deeper into Guild Wars 1 territory. This one might be a little out there as well, and I'm not exactly sure how we could connect it, but I still feel like it's important to talk about. Okay, who's Evennia? In Guild Wars 1, Evennia was the leader of the Shining Blade, fighting the White Mantle that was in control of Kryta as a rebel faction. Eventually, joining forces with the Shining Blade, we, the heroes, helped them take back Kryta, and Princess Selma is crowned queen. So what's so interesting about that? Well, Evennia is actually absent during the final assault in Lion's Arch. Right before the battle starts, she journeys out to Ascalon to ask King Adalburn for support against the Mersad. As far as we know, she was denied for a while until she finally disappeared without a trace. Her last known location was Old Ascalon. It's strange to have a character of such prominence disappear so suddenly. Whether or not there were plans for her in future updates that ended up getting cancelled, it wouldn't be too crazy to think that perhaps she was taken in by the Astral Ward or something along those lines. We do not know how powerful she was, but judging by the idea that she was the leader of the Shining Blade, and her essentially being the master exemplar of her time, which I know wasn't a rank then, but you get the idea, she could potentially have been very powerful in her own right. She was also very smart and dedicated, which somewhat strengthens this theory. Again, this is just a theory, but having her just killed off screen without any trace or explanation would be rather sad for a character that played a major role throughout Guild Wars 1, and at least it would explain the sudden disappearance. While we're on the subject of Guild Wars 1, let's talk about Razah. We meet Razah in Nightfall as an identity born of the Mists. It is bound here by Abaddon, but before Abaddon could use it, we destroy him. Razah afterwards informs us that it no longer has a purpose, and not knowing much about the world and lacking things like common sense, it joins the party. Being part of the party, it does journey with us to the Eye of the North and beyond expansions of Guild Wars 1, but it's always been a mystery as to what happened to Razah. Having been born of the Mist makes it not just potentially immortal, but also very important, and therefore could really fit into the story of Secrets of the Obscure. I think, after all the journeys with the heroes of Guild Wars 1, it probably learned the difference between good and evil, and perhaps it realized that, as a being born of the Mist, that it had a sort of inclination to fight evil from the Mist specifically, and what better way to do so than join a timeless organization that does exactly that. So my theory is that perhaps Razah, too, could potentially be part of the Aster Ward. Now this one is someone that everyone is talking about. I have tried to stuff enough people into the Aster Ward, and it's getting a tad crowded, so let's talk a little bit about the Cryptus. First off, who is Menzies? And yes, that is apparently how you pronounce that, and how does he seem important? Well, Menzies is Balthazar's half-brother. Yes, the battle-hungry god of war that we defeat at the end of Path of Fire. Do you remember the Burning Forest in Dragonfall? Well, here we meet some of Menzies' minions, the Shadow Army. The Fissure of Woe, which the Burning Forest is part of, is Balthazar's god realm and the location of the eternal battle between Balthazar's and Menzies' forces. Menzies has been trying to take Balthazar's place for a long time, and there were rumors that perhaps Balthazar had won against Menzies because he shifted his gaze towards the Elder Dragons and didn't seem too interested in protecting his own realm anymore, suggesting that perhaps Menzies had been defeated or driven away. None of this is ever confirmed though, and the events at Dragonfall do happen after Balthazar's defeat, which does seem to suggest that the Shadow Army was still in or had returned to the Fissure of Woe. And while it was confirmed by Bobby Stein, the narrative director at ArenaNet, that the shadow creatures at Gyala Delve belong to a currently considered unknown race, which mind you, could be the Cryptus as this comment was made before the announcement of Secrets of the Obscure, it doesn't rule out Menzies as having some involvement here. McLean Deemer, the lead composer at ArenaNet, posted on his Instagram about Menzies. It was nothing concrete, and I don't have Instagram so I couldn't actually pull it up, but nonetheless, it does seem weird that the lead composer would talk about something so obscure in the Guild Wars universe unless he was composing something for said character. So let's talk about what makes it so compelling that Menzies could perhaps be in the story of Secrets of the Obscure. In Guild Wars 1, Menzies was known for having teamed up with both Doom and Abaddon, and specifically Abaddon did have demons under his command. That could certainly mean that yes, his Shadow Army is part of the Cryptus now, but only because he decided to join them finally. We also do not know what Menzies looks like. While I do not think that we can see Menzies in the trailer as the creature in front of the rift, it's not completely out of the question. So here's a crazy theory for you guys. Let's twist the idea of him being Balthazar's half-brother. Whether or not Balthazar was born of two gods, or if he, like Grenth at some point, was a demigod is unknown. But what if Menzies, on the other hand, is the offspring of a god and a demon? So perhaps he's the creature in the trailer, and being part demon could further the idea of him joining forces with other demons. Maybe whoever his parent on the demon side is part of one of the houses of the Cryptus. Maybe even a leader. Menzies could have struggled with the idea of being half demon and wanted to become a full-fledged god by taking his half-brother's place as the god of war, but after failing numerous times decided to embrace the demonic side within him and join forces with the Cryptus. This is just some random theory I came up with, and while I would rather have ArenaNet reserve a story involving Menzies for an expansion about the gods, if they decide to have him play a part here, I think there are some interesting ways that they could put a cool spin on his story. Let me know how you would see his involvements play out in the comments down below. Since the last video, there was some discussion about the symbols above the door, and I have since changed my mind. I do not think that these have anything to do with the All. It was suggested that these symbols look like what we can find on the map of the All, but when comparing the two, you can actually see they're completely different. I then thought about how they're being used on the website for the releases. So what if these symbols represent either time or space? Meaning each symbol could either be a certain moment in time, suggesting that the Stargate is used to traverse time, or perhaps they could mean different locations. Since we know there will be 3 maps released for Secrets of the Obscure, 2 with the initial release and 1 later down the road, could these symbols maybe have something to do with where we're going with the releases? I'm certainly more curious about them now, since I do think they will play some kind of role in the expansion. But while we're on the subject of symbols, I thought about what other things we have seen in the Guild Wars universe that could perhaps shed some light. Unfortunately, the only thing I found was more mysteries. For one, in Guild Wars 1, there are runic stones out in the Maguma jungle. They have 3 symbols on them, none of which look like the symbols above the door. While these do not appear in Guild Wars 2 and are probably forgotten now, it is always important to point out things like this. Once I discovered these, I did however think of something else that I have seen in Guild Wars 1, the Talmark Pillars. So Talmark Wilderness in Guild Wars 1 was a far out explorable area where the Shining Blade was hiding out at. There, you could come across a bunch of pillars with symbols on them that no one ever figured out what they say, and just like the runic stones, don't do anything. While they once again do not appear in Guild Wars 2 since this area is in Queensdale and we find nothing like this there, it does seem that we have a little bit of a connection to something we have already talked about before, the Wizard's Folly Tower. The tower in preceding Ascalon is surrounded by similar looking pillars without any symbols on them. Again, the connection is weak, but I figured I should mention it as I stated before. There seem to be many unexplained mysteries to the Guild Wars universe. So, since we're talking about the Wizard's Folly Tower, let's finish today's video with some incredible news. If you don't know what the Wizard's Folly Tower is, I suggest you watch my other video on Secrets of the Obscure to get an idea of how I think this tower is connected to this release. Now, as luck would have it, someone on stream pointed out that Massively OP released an article talking about some of the information on the upcoming expansion. Within said article, however, were a few pictures that had not been shown to the public. In one of those pictures, you can see a structure that very closely resembles the Wizard's Folly Tower, albeit it's obviously more detailed and isn't a direct copy. But I mean, look at the changes the Wizard's Tower in Keswick's Hills went through. With the new game comes a new motto obviously, since we haven't seen this tower since preceding Ascalon. Comparing the two structures though, we can see that both are made up of 2 spires with smaller spires attached to it. The 2 spires are also connected at the bottom where the windows to the inside are via a bridge of some sort. The windows also look very similar in shape. I really do think that what we're looking at here is the new model of the Wizard's Folly Tower. What do you think? Do you think that this confirms my theory about the connection of the 2 towers, or am I just crazy? Well, that concludes this video. I wanted this to be a short follow-up to the first video, but it seems there was a lot more to talk about. Like I said before, I do not know if any of these will play a role, but I know that these subjects are some of the long-standing mysteries of the Guild Wars universe, and it would be really cool to get some answers. Whether or not these are connected, I still hope you enjoyed this even deeper dive into the obscure side of Guild Wars. Let me know if there's perhaps something I have missed, or maybe you have your own crazy theory. Make sure to leave that in the comments as I would love to read about it. Also, I will be making more content like this, so stay tuned by hitting that subscribe button. It would really help me out a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.